The pathetic little pond he calls his life's work. Monday is your deadline, buddy. Those words ripped through the morning mist like a chainsaw cutting through silence. Patricia Calhoun stood on the edge of my lake at 5:43 a.m., her red blazer blazing against the gray dawn like a warning flare. She held a freshly painted sign reading, "Private Property, Oak Ridge Manor HOA," as though it were a battle flag she had every right to plant. Behind her, 2 men are carrying steel posts and sledgehammers. $47,500 I had poured into this lake, 6 months of digging and building, and now they wanted to stake their claim on it. But I am a civil engineer with 20 years of experience. I know how to read legal maps. If you have ever had someone try to take what is rightfully yours, comment below where you are watching from. I did not move from my porch. The coffee in my hand was still steaming, and I let the silence stretch between us like a wire pulled to its breaking point. Patricia had chosen this hour deliberately, hoping no neighbors would witness her little stunt before the sun fully rose. She shifted her weight from one expensive heel to the other, clearly expecting me to storm down there and give her the confrontation she had rehearsed. Instead, I took a slow sip and watched the vapor curl upward into the cold air. The 2 men behind her exchanged uncertain glances because they had been hired for a quick job, a simple sign installation, not a standoff with a homeowner who refused to flinch. One of them, a heavy-set fellow with a beard that needed trimming, lowered his sledgehammer. The other kept glancing back toward the white HOA van parked on the street, with its engine still running, as if calculating exactly how quickly he could retreat to it if things went sideways. Patricia cleared her throat, and I caught the first crack in her composure, a tiny fissure that would soon become a canyon. "Garrett, this does not have to be difficult. The lake is within HOA common area boundaries, and we have documentation to prove it. All we are asking is that you acknowledge community ownership and allow residents reasonable access for recreational purposes." Her voice carried that particular blend of condescension and false sweetness that HOA presidents seem to cultivate like a professional skill. I had heard it countless times before in board meetings, where she steamrolled every objection with procedural technicalities and veiled threats about property values. But this time, she had made a critical miscalculation. This time, she was dealing with someone who had spent 2 decades reading surveys, plat maps, and construction specifications for projects worth millions of dollars. Someone who understood that, in property disputes, documentation is not just important, it is absolutely everything. I set my coffee down on the porch railing and walked toward them, stopping exactly 3 feet from where Patricia stood, close enough to see the tiny beads of sweat forming at her hairline, despite the morning chill. "Show me the documentation," I said. "Show me the recorded plat map that indicates this lake falls within common area boundaries as defined by the original subdivision filing." Patricia reached into her leather portfolio and produced a folded paper, handing it to me with a flourish meant to project confidence. I unfolded it carefully and examined every line and marking with the same attention I would give to blueprints for a bridge foundation. It was a map, certainly. It showed Oak Ridge Manor subdivision with lots numbered and common areas shaded in green. And encompassing my lake was a green overlay with the words "Community Amenity Zone" printed in neat, official-looking letters. But something was very wrong. There was no recording stamp from the county. There was no plat book reference number. There was no county seal or filing date anywhere on the document. This was nothing more than a printout that someone had modified using basic software and then presented as if it carried the weight of law. I recognized the technique because I had seen contractors try similar tricks when they wanted to cut corners. Create a document that looks official to intimidate people who do not know better. I folded the paper and handed it back to her. This is not a recorded plat map. This is an internal document with no legal standing whatsoever in any property dispute. Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Our legal team has reviewed the boundaries extensively. The lake clearly falls within the original common area designation." I shook my head. "Then your legal team failed to check the county recorder's office. Plat Book 47, page 312. That is where the actual recorded boundaries for this subdivision are documented, filed, and stamped by the county in 2018. I paused to let that sink in. I suggest you look it up before you put that sign anywhere near my property, because what you are holding is not evidence of ownership. It is evidence that someone created a fraudulent document. The two workers had completely abandoned any pretense of preparing for installation. They stood frozen with the uncomfortable expressions of men who had just realized they might be accessories to something illegal. Patricia's face went pale as every rehearsed argument crumbled beneath her. I turned and began walking back toward my porch, then paused to deliver one final message. And Patricia, one more thing. I have receipts for every dollar I spent building that lake. The $12,000 clay liner alone took 3 weeks to install properly. Every permit application, every contractor invoice, every load of gravel is documented in a folder 4 inches thick. I watched her jaw tighten as the implications registered. So before you plant that sign, ask yourself one question. Do you really have the documentation to back up what you are about to do? Because I certainly have the documentation to prove you are attempting to steal my property. I did not wait for her response. I walked inside, closed the door behind me, and went directly to my home office, where I pulled a thick folder from my filing cabinet labeled Lake Construction, 2019. Inside were 237 pages that would tell the true story. But more importantly, I opened my laptop and navigated to the county recorder website. 2 weeks earlier, Patricia had asked me casually at a neighborhood barbecue whether I might consider opening the lake for community use. I had politely declined. Now I understand that the question was never a friendly inquiry. It was reconnaissance, and her pre-dawn visit today was not a negotiation. It was the opening move in a land grab she had been planning for months. 3 days after the pre-dawn confrontation, an email arrived in my inbox at exactly 7:15 a.m. The subject line read, "Official Violation Notice," and the sender was the Oak Ridge Manor HOA Administrative Office. I opened it while standing at my kitchen counter, already knowing it would not contain anything resembling good news. The message was formal, cold, and dripping with bureaucratic menace. Dear Mr. Wade, this letter serves as official notice that you have violated CC&R's Article 4.7 regarding obstruction of community access to common amenities. Your refusal to allow resident access to the lake located within HOA jurisdiction constitutes a serious breach of community guidelines. Initial fine $500. If not remedied within 14 days, the fine will increase to $15,000. I read it twice, then saved it to the evidence folder I had created the night Patricia showed up on my property with her worthless map and her hired muscle. That afternoon I drove to the HOA office, a small brick building near the subdivision entrance that always smelled like stale coffee and desperation. Patricia was waiting in the conference room, seated at the head of a long table as if presiding over a Fortune 500 board meeting. Her smile was ice when I walked in. Garrett, I hoped we could resolve this like reasonable neighbors before things escalate further. I took a seat across from her and placed my phone on the table. Screen down. Show me something new. Patricia, something with a county seal and a recording date. Because we both know that modified printout you waved at me last week would not survive 5 minutes in front of a judge. Her smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered. She did not reach for any folder this time. Instead, she folded her hands on the table and leaned forward. The community has spoken. Garrett, residents want access to that lake. They deserve access, and one stubborn homeowner should not stand in the way of collective benefit. I studied her face, searching for any crack in the performance. Let me be very clear about something. The CC&Rs define common areas as regions designated in the recorded plat map filed with the county. Not internal documents, not wish lists. The recorded plot, my lake sits entirely within Lot 47, which I own outright. So, unless you have suddenly discovered new legal standing, this conversation is over. Patricia's eyes hardened. Our attorneys see it differently. And frankly, community sentiment is shifting against you faster than you might realize. I stood and retrieved my phone. Then tell your attorneys to visit the county recorder's office. Plat Book 47, page 312. That document will end this discussion permanently. As I walked toward the door, Patricia's voice followed me with a new edge I had not heard before. Garrett, neighborhoods have long memories. The man who refused to share his little pond with children and families. That is a reputation that tends to stick. I stopped, but did not turn around. Is that a threat? She let out a soft laugh. Just perspective? Something to consider. I left without responding, but her words stayed with me during the drive home. When I pulled into my driveway, I checked the neighborhood online forum on my phone, the place where residents discussed everything from lost pets to noise complaints. A new post sat at the top of the feed with the title, "One Resident Blocking Community Progress." The first comment came from an account I had never seen before. Why should one person hoard an amenity that benefits all our families? The lake was built on community land and should be shared with everyone. I scrolled through dozens of replies. Most echoed the sentiment, expressing outrage at this unnamed, selfish neighbor. A few questioned whether the facts were accurate, but their voices were drowned in the flood of manufactured anger. Patricia was not just fighting me in conference rooms. She was waging a propaganda campaign, turning my neighbors into a mob before I even had a chance to present the truth. That evening, I pulled up the CCNR's document and read it line by line for the third time since this ordeal began. Article 4.7 confirmed what I already knew. Common areas were defined solely by the recorded plat. But Article 6.3 contained something more troubling, a clause about reclamation of improperly placed structures on common land. If Patricia could convince enough residents that my lake sat on common property, the HOA could theoretically seize everything I had built around it. The fishing dock, the stone benches, the pathway I had laid by hand over 3 weekends. That was when I heard the sound of an engine idling outside. Through my window, I spotted a black SUV parked 3 houses down, sitting motionless in the fading light. On its door was a logo I did not recognize, silver letters spelling Meridian Development Group, beneath a stylized mountain peak. The vehicle sat there for nearly 10 minutes before slowly pulling away. I wrote down the name and added it to my evidence folder. 2 weeks ago, Patricia had casually asked if I would consider opening the lake for community use. I had declined politely. Now I was facing fines, public smearing, and mysterious vehicles casing my neighborhood. This was no longer a simple HOA dispute. Something much larger was unfolding in Oak Ridge Manor, and Patricia Calhoun was orchestrating every move. 1 week after Patricia's thinly veiled threats, I drove to the county recorder office with a single purpose. I needed the certified copy of the original plat map, the document that would end this dispute permanently. The office was a gray government building with fluorescent lights that buzzed like dying insects, and clerks who moved with the enthusiasm of people counting down to retirement. I approached the counter and gave my request to a woman named Cheryl, whose reading glasses hung from a beaded chain around her neck. She typed slowly, squinting at her monitor. Plat Book 47, page 312, Oak Ridge Manor Subdivision, recorded August 15, 2018. She printed the certified copy and stamped it with the county seal. I examined it quickly, confirming what I already knew. My lake sat entirely within Lot 47. Not 1 inch touched the common area. Patricia's entire claim was built on fabricated documents and community manipulation, but Cheryl was not finished. She glanced at her screen and frowned slightly. Interesting. There was another inquiry about this same area just last week. A company called Meridian Development Group requested zoning information and easement records for several parcels in your subdivision. My stomach tightened. What kind of zoning information? Cheryl shrugged. Standard developer questions. Density allowances, commercial usage rights, and amenity expansion possibilities. They were particularly interested in water features. I thanked her and walked to my car, with my mind racing. Meridian Development Group, the same name on that black SUV parked outside my house days earlier. They were not casually observing Oak Ridge Manor. They were actively researching it for acquisition, and they were specifically interested in water features. In my lake, I sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes, staring at the certified plat map. feeling pieces of a puzzle I had not known existed suddenly clicking into place. When I got home, I searched for Meridian Development Group online. Their website was sleek and professional, filled with renderings of luxury communities and resort-style amenities. But buried in their news section, I found something that made my blood run cold. A press release from 3 months earlier announced that Meridian was exploring acquisition opportunities in established residential communities with untapped amenity potential. One quote stood out: "We specialize in transforming underutilized community assets into premium lifestyle features that dramatically increase property values." I kept digging. On the County Planning Department website, I discovered a filed document titled Proposed Development, Oak Ridge Manor Community Enhancement. The project described expanding existing water features, adding a clubhouse, pool, and boat dock. Estimated project value $2.3 million. And there, at the bottom of the proposal, listed as the HOA representative facilitating the project, was Patricia Calhoun. She was not trying to steal my lake for community access. She was planning to hand it to a developer as part of a multi-million-dollar deal. I printed every document and spread them across my dining room table. The timeline crystallized with sickening clarity. 3 months ago, Patricia began conversations with Meridian. 6 weeks ago, she approached me at a barbecue asking if I would share the lake. When I declined, she launched her assault. The pre-dawn sign planting, the violation notices, the online smear campaign. None of it was about fairness or community spirit. It was about securing the centerpiece of a development project before Meridian's appraisal deadline. Without my lake, the deal would collapse, or the valuation would drop dramatically. With it, Patricia would likely pocket a substantial consulting fee for delivering the asset she had promised. I thought about all those neighbors posting furious comments about my selfishness, completely unaware they were being weaponized by a woman planning to profit from their manufactured outrage. I created a new folder on my computer and labeled it HOA Fraud Evidence. Into it went the certified plat map, the Meridian proposal, the press releases, and screenshots showing Patricia's name on the development documents. The old private property sign I had glimpsed in her garage during a neighborhood visit last spring suddenly made sense. She had prepared that sign months before approaching me, confident I would either cooperate willingly or be crushed into submission. But Patricia had miscalculated badly. She saw a quiet neighbor who kept to himself and assumed that meant weakness. She did not realize that quiet people often stay quiet because they are busy observing, learning, and preparing. She wanted a battle fought with paperwork and procedure. She had no idea I had been training for exactly that fight my entire professional life. And now I had the evidence to prove she was not at all protecting the community. She was betraying it for personal profit. Patricia called an emergency town hall meeting for 7 p.m. on a Thursday evening, announcing it through official HOA channels as a community discussion about shared amenities and neighborhood unity. I knew exactly what it really was: a public tribunal designed to turn my neighbors into a mob and pressure me into surrendering without a fight. The community center was packed when I arrived. Over 150 residents filling rows of folding chairs that squeaked against the linoleum floor. I walked in alone and took a seat near the back, feeling the weight of hostile stares from people I had waved to for years without incident. Patricia stood at a podium in front, wearing a navy blazer that projected authority and a smile that radiated absolute confidence. Behind her, a projector displayed a slide titled "Building a Better Oak Ridge Manor Together." The subtitle read, "Community Assets for Community Benefit." I noticed she had carefully avoided any specific legal language that might expose her claims to scrutiny. Patricia opened with a performance worthy of a seasoned politician. "Thank you all for coming tonight. Our beautiful community has an opportunity to enhance shared amenities and increase everyone's property values by 15 to 20%. However, one resident has chosen to obstruct this progress by refusing to acknowledge community ownership of a key asset." She paused for effect, letting the murmurs ripple through the crowd. "I am not here to attack anyone. I simply want what is best for all of us, for our children, for our investments." A woman in the third row leaned forward. "Is this about that pond situation? My kids would love to fish there." Patricia nodded solemnly. "It is about a resident who constructed a water feature on common area land, then claimed exclusive ownership despite our documentation." Another voice cut through from the side. "So he just built something on our land, and now acts like he owns it." The framing was working exactly as Patricia intended. I felt my jaw tighten, but remained silent. More voices joined the chorus. Someone demanded to know what legal options the HOA had. Another asked why one person should benefit, while everyone else paid dues. Patricia answered each with practiced smoothness, painting me as the obstacle standing between hard-working families and their rightful property values. Then she made her first critical mistake. "And if this situation is not resolved soon, a development opportunity worth over $2 million could be lost, and every homeowner here will suffer the consequences." The room erupted in angry whispers. A man near the front shouted, "Make him pay for what he is costing us." I stood up slowly, and the noise died like someone had pulled a plug. Every eye turned toward me as I walked down the center aisle. Patricia's expression tightened almost imperceptibly, but she gestured toward the podium with exaggerated graciousness. "Garrett, would you like to address the community?" I stopped 10 feet from her and turned to face my neighbors. "I have one question for Patricia," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You mentioned a development opportunity worth over $2 million. How much consulting fee do you personally receive if that deal closes?" The silence was suffocating. Patricia forced a laugh that convinced no one. "My only interest is the welfare of this community." I nodded. "Then explain why the Meridian Development Group proposal filed with the county lists you as the HOA advisor facilitating the project, and why that same company has been surveying our neighborhood for weeks." The murmurs shifted tone instantly. Confusion replaced certainty. A retired police officer named Marcus Holloway rose from the middle section. "Patricia, that deserves a straight answer. Are you being compensated by this developer?" She hesitated 1 second too long. "Any advisory relationship is completely separate from my HOA duties." Marcus remained standing. "That is not a denial." A younger woman near the front joined him. Claire Dennison, an attorney who had moved in 2 years ago. "I would like to see the recorded plat that proves the lake is a common area. Not internal maps. The actual county filing." Patricia's voice turned sharp. "This is not the forum for legal technicalities." Sarah crossed her arms. "You called this meeting to discuss community assets. Proving ownership seems like the first step." I pulled the certified plat map from my jacket and held it up. "This is the only document that matters. The lake sits entirely within my lot. It has never been designated a common area." The room fractured instantly. Some residents demanded that Patricia respond to the accusations. Others insisted I was manipulating the situation. Patricia slammed her hand on the podium. "This meeting is adjourned. We will continue through proper legal channels." She gathered her materials and rushed toward the exit without looking back. Sarah approached me in the parking lot afterward. "You rattled her, but she will retaliate fast. What is your next move?" I told her about the licensed surveyor I had scheduled for the end of the week, the official boundary stakes, and the certified report that would create evidence no court could dismiss. She handed me her card. "Document everything she sends you from now on. Emails, notices, threats. You need a paper trail proving bad faith." I drove home feeling something I had not experienced in weeks. Hope. But Patricia was not finished. That night at 11:45 p.m., an email arrived from the HOA administrative account. "Final notice, remove all personal property from the community lake area within 7 days or face reclamation action under CC&R's Article 6.3. Failure to comply will result in seizure and storage of all unauthorized structures at the owner's expense." 7 days. She was forcing a confrontation before my surveyor could complete his work. I saved the email to my evidence folder and opened my calendar. The surveyor was scheduled for day 5. I would have the certified report within 48 hours to spare. Patricia thought she was tightening the noose. She did not realize she was building the case against herself with every desperate move. Day 5 arrived with clear skies and a light breeze that made the water on my lake shimmer like liquid silver. "Tom Richter, pulled into my driveway at 8 a.m. sharp, his white pickup truck loaded with surveying equipment that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. Tom was 55 years old, with a weathered face, and hands that had driven boundary stakes into the ground for over 3 decades. He was licensed by the Commonwealth, certified in ALTA NSPS standards, and his reports had been accepted as evidence in dozens of court cases. I was paying $1,200 for expedited service. It was the best money I had ever spent. Tom unloaded his total station, GPS receiver, and reference documents while I showed him my deed and the certified plat. He studied them for several minutes, occasionally making notes in a weathered field book. "Straightforward boundaries," he said finally. "Should have your report by the end of the day." I watched from my porch as he worked methodically around the property, taking measurements and driving metal stakes into the ground at each corner point. Around noon, Tom waved me over to where he was standing near the lake's edge. "See this line?" He pointed to an imaginary boundary running about 15 feet from the water. "That is where your lot ends. According to the HOA's internal map, the one they have been using to claim your lake is a common area." He then pointed to the stake he had just driven into the ground, nearly 40 feet further out. "And this is where your lot actually ends. According to the recorded plat. Not even close." The discrepancy was staggering. Patricia's entire case was built on a boundary line that existed only in documents her organization had fabricated. The actual legal boundary placed by my lake so far within my property that her claims were not just wrong, they were laughable. I felt something loosen in my chest that I had not realized was clenched for weeks. Tom finished his work by 3 p.m. and handed me a preliminary summary. Every measurement confirmed what the certified plat had already shown. But now I had independent verification with GPS coordinates accurate to within a quarter inch and professional certification under Virginia Code Section 54.1-406. I called Claire Dennison immediately. "The survey is done. 100% my property. The HOA boundary is off by nearly 40 feet. She was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. "That changes everything. Garrett, with the plat, the deed, and now an independent survey, you have an airtight case. Trespass for the sign they tried to plant, attempted conversion for claiming ownership, and potentially fraud given Patricia's undisclosed financial stake in that development deal." I spent the evening organizing everything into a single comprehensive file. The county documents, Tom's survey with photographs of the boundary stakes, every email and violation notice from the HOA, time-stamped and preserved. The Meridian Development Proposal listing Patricia as facilitating advisor for a $2.3 million project that depended on acquiring my lake. Sarah reviewed the file the next morning and nodded with what I can only describe as predatory satisfaction. "This is not defense anymore. This is an offense." The cease and desist letter went out that afternoon via certified mail. It demanded immediate removal of all HOA signage from my property, written retraction of ownership claims, and cessation of any third-party communications asserting HOA control over the lake. The legal citations were surgical. Virginia Code Section 8.01-42 for trespass, Section 55.1-1815, confirming HOA authority extends only to common areas defined in recorded plats. Failure to comply within 72 hours would result in a lawsuit seeking compensatory damages, punitive damages, and injunctive relief. I hand-delivered a copy to the HOA office and watched the receptionist's face drain of color as she scanned the first paragraph. "Mrs. Calhoun is not available," she managed. I smiled. Just make sure she gets it. The 72 hours passed without response. The sign remained planted defiantly on my property. Patricia was calling my bluff, convinced I would not actually follow through. At 8:15 a.m. on the morning after the deadline expired, Sarah filed our complaint in circuit court. Wade v. Oak Ridge Manor Homeowners Association. The charges were trespass to land, attempted conversion of property, and fraud arising from undisclosed financial conflicts of interest. We requested compensatory damages for the harassment campaign, punitive damages for willful misconduct, and an injunction permanently barring the HOA from any claim on my lake. The court date was set for 21 days out. I thought about Patricia receiving the summons, reading the detailed accusations, and realizing that every threatening email she had sent was now evidence against her. She had spent months building a trap designed to crush me into submission. Instead, she had constructed the scaffolding for her own professional destruction. I saved the court filing confirmation to my evidence folder and looked out at my lake. Still and peaceful in the morning light, the battle was far from over. But for the first time since that pre-dawn ambush, I was no longer playing defense. I was bringing the fight to her. The lawsuit sent shockwaves through Oak Ridge Manor, within hours of the filing, becoming public record. My phone began buzzing with messages from neighbors I had barely spoken to in years. Some offered support, apologizing for believing the narrative without questioning it. Others demanded to know why I was attacking the community with legal action. I ignored most of them. The court of public opinion was irrelevant now. The only court that mattered was the one where Judge Harold Newman would preside in 21 days. Patricia responded by hiring David Morton, a 60-year-old attorney with silver hair and a reputation for aggressive litigation. His first move was predictable, a motion to dismiss, arguing the HOA had acted in good faith based on a reasonable interpretation of community boundaries. Sarah laughed when she read it. Good faith, we have emails proving she knew the lake was your property years before this started. This motion is dead on arrival. 2 weeks before the trial date, something unexpected happened. Linda Foster, the HOA office secretary, called me at 7:30 p.m. on a Tuesday. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Mr. Wade, I probably should not be calling, but what is happening is not right. I have worked here 6 years and watched things change. She explained that 3 months ago. The private calls with Meridian Development began. Closed doors, hushed conversations. I recorded one of those calls. She was talking about your lake like it was already hers, saying you were just some engineer who did not understand how things worked, that she would crush you until you gave up. I asked if she would testify. A long pause. I am scared. But yes, someone needs to stop this. I called Sarah immediately. Her reaction was electric. A recording of her admitting intent to illegally seize your property, Virginia, is a one-party consent state. Linda had every right to record what she heard in her workplace. This changes everything. News of the lawsuit spread beyond the subdivision. A reporter from the local newspaper reached out, asking about what she described as an apparent case of HOA overreach with possible fraud implications. I declined the interview, but pointed her toward the public court filings. Within days, an article appeared with the headline, Homeowner alleges HOA president attempted property seizure for personal gain. The story laid out the facts: the disputed lake, the fabricated boundary maps, the undisclosed relationship with Meridian Development. Patricia's attorney issued a statement calling the allegations baseless and defamatory, but the damage was done. Residents who had supported her began asking uncomfortable questions. Board members who had rubber-stamped her decisions started distancing themselves publicly. The carefully constructed narrative was collapsing under documented evidence and journalistic scrutiny. 1 week before the trial, Patricia called another emergency HOA meeting. This time, the atmosphere was different. Instead of a unified crowd, the room was divided and tense. She tried to frame the lawsuit as an attack on the entire community, but Marcus Holloway cut her off. The lawsuit is against the board, not us. Why did you never disclose your relationship with that developer? Other voices joined in. Questions about the Meridian deal. Accusations about fiduciary duty violations. Patricia insisted all her actions were in the community's best interest, but the words fell flat. Sarah and I watched from the back. She is losing them, Sarah whispered. By trial day, she will not have a single ally left. I kept my eyes on Patricia. Flushed face, erratic gestures. The meeting ended without resolution, but the outcome was clear. Her grip on the community had shattered completely. As I walked to my car, Marcus Holloway caught up with me in the parking lot. Garrett, I owe you an apology. I should have asked questions before joining that first mob. I shook his hand. You are asking them now. That is what counts. He nodded slowly. Just make sure you finish this. People like her do not stop until someone forces them to. I drove home thinking about his words. In 7 days, I would have that chance. The evidence was assembled. The witnesses were prepared. Linda's recording sat in Sarah's safe, waiting to be unleashed. And Patricia Calhoun was about to learn what happened when you tried to steal from someone who kept meticulous records and refused to back down. The pre-dawn ambush that started this war felt like a lifetime ago. Soon it would end in a courtroom, with the truth laid bare for everyone to see. Circuit Court, Courtroom 3, 9 a.m. on a Wednesday morning. The gallery was packed with over 80 Oak Ridge Manor residents who had come to witness the conclusion of a dispute that had consumed our community for months. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Sarah beside me, our evidence organized in neat folders. Across the aisle, Patricia Calhoun sat rigid in her chair, flanked by David Morton and 2 junior associates. She wore a charcoal suit that projected authority, but her eyes betrayed something I had never seen in her before: fear. Judge Harold Newman, a 68-year-old jurist with a reputation for cutting through nonsense, took his seat and called the proceedings to order. The room fell silent. This was the moment everything had been building toward since that pre-dawn ambush on my property. Morton opened for the defense with practiced confidence. Your Honor, this is a simple boundary misunderstanding. The HOA acted in good faith to protect shared amenities. Mr. Wade's claims are inflammatory and unsupported. Sarah rose, her voice calm but razor-sharp. Your Honor, we will demonstrate that the defendant knowingly used fabricated documents to claim property legally belonging to my client. We will further show the HOA president had an undisclosed financial interest in seizing this property for a development deal worth over $2 million. She presented the certified plat, the boundary survey, and the meridian proposal in quick succession. Morton objected repeatedly, but Judge Newman overruled each time, his expression growing stern as the evidence mounted. The foundation of Patricia's defense was crumbling before she even had a chance to speak. Then Sarah called our surprise witness. Linda Foster walked to the stand, looking terrified but determined. She stated her name and position, then described what she had observed during her time at the HOA office. 3 months ago, Mrs. Calhoun began having private calls with Meridian Development. I could hear portions through the office walls. Morton objected immediately. Hearsay. Your Honor, Linda continued. I recorded one of those conversations. Sarah submitted the recording as evidence. Morton objected again. Claiming illegal obtainment, Sarah countered. Virginia is a one-party consent state. Ms. Foster had every legal right to record what she heard in her workplace. Judge Newman admitted the recording. The bailiff connected a speaker to the court's audio system. Every person in that gallery leaned forward as if drawn by invisible strings. Patricia's voice filled the courtroom. Do not worry about the pond owner. I will handle him. That lake will belong to the HOA whether he likes it or not. He is just some engineer who does not understand how things work. I will bury him in fines and turn the whole neighborhood against him. By the time I am done, he will be begging to sign it over. And once we close this deal, my consulting fee will make it all worth the headache. The recording ended. Silence. 80 pairs of eyes turned toward Patricia. Her face had gone white. She gripped the edge of the table so hard, her knuckles looked ready to burst through skin. Morton whispered urgently in her ear, but she shook her head, frozen. Judge Newman removed his glasses and stared at her for a long moment. Mrs. Calhoun, do you wish to take the stand? Morton stood quickly. My client declines to testify. The judge nodded slowly. Based on the evidence presented, I am prepared to render judgment. He paused, letting the weight settle over the room. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff on all counts. The lake sits entirely within the plaintiff's property and has never been designated a common area. The HOA's actions constitute trespass and attempted conversion. The undisclosed financial arrangement represents a clear breach of fiduciary duty. He turned to Patricia directly. Mrs. Calhoun, you weaponized your position to steal from someone you were sworn to serve. The judgment was devastating. $25,000 in compensatory damages, $50,000 in punitive damages for willful misconduct. All attorney fees are to be paid by the HOA. An injunction permanently barring any claim on the lake. The sign is to be removed within 24 hours. and the case file referred to the district attorney for fraud investigation. Patricia sat motionless as the numbers were read. When the judge dismissed the proceedings, she stood mechanically. "I am resigning as HOA president, effective immediately." Her voice was hollow, emptied of the authority she had wielded for 8 years. The gallery erupted in murmurs. Some residents looked satisfied, others stunned. A few openly applauded before the bailiff silenced them. Marcus Holloway caught my eye from across the room and gave me a single, solemn nod. Sarah gathered our files and touched my arm. $75,000 plus fees. And a DA referral. She is finished. Garrett. I watched Patricia walk toward the exit, shoulders hunched, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. 3 months ago, she had stood on my property at dawn, planting a sign like she was claiming conquered territory. Now she was leaving a courtroom stripped of power, reputation, and possibly her freedom. I felt no satisfaction, only relief. It was over. The truth had won. 3 weeks after the verdict, life in Oak Ridge Manor had transformed in ways I could not have imagined when this nightmare began. The HOA held emergency elections, and Marcus Holloway was voted in as interim president with a mandate to reform everything Patricia had corrupted during her 8-year reign. His first act was forming an oversight committee of 5 residents who would review all board decisions before implementation. Claire Dennison volunteered to rewrite the bylaws from scratch, adding checks and balances that would prevent any future president from wielding unchecked power. She drafted provisions requiring financial disclosure for any board member involved in development discussions, mandatory recording of all official meetings, and a recall process that could be triggered by a petition of just 15% of homeowners. The days of one person controlling an entire community through intimidation and procedural manipulation were officially over. Oak Ridge Manor was becoming what it should have been all along. A neighborhood governed by transparency rather than fear. The Meridian development deal collapsed completely within days of the judgment. Without my lake as the centerpiece amenity, the project lost its financial appeal, and the company withdrew its proposal before the ink on the court documents was dry. I later learned from Sarah that Meridian had been counting on the lake to justify premium pricing for the clubhouse memberships and boat dock access they had planned. Without it, the numbers simply did not work. Patricia Calhoun had promised them something she had no right to deliver, and her failure cost them months of planning and tens of thousands in preliminary expenses. They were reportedly considering their own legal action against her for misrepresentation, though I never followed up to confirm. Her problems were no longer my concern. Patricia was last seen loading boxes into a moving truck on a gray Tuesday morning. Her house quietly listed for sale through an out-of-town realtor who probably had no idea about the scandal attached to the property. Neighbors who had once rallied behind her now crossed the street to avoid eye contact when she emerged from her front door. The district attorney's office had opened a formal investigation into fraud charges stemming from the fabricated boundary documents and her undisclosed financial arrangement with Meridian. Word spread through the neighborhood grapevine that Patricia had retained a criminal defense attorney, a serious one from Richmond, who specialized in white-collar cases. The potential charges included fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and conspiracy to commit theft by deception. If convicted on all counts, she faced up to 10 years in state prison and fines exceeding $50,000. I took no pleasure in her downfall. She had brought it entirely upon herself through arrogance and greed. But watching someone's life unravel is never something to celebrate. What I did feel was relief. Relief that the system had worked. Relief that documentation and truth had prevailed over manipulation and lies. Relief that I could finally stop fighting and start healing. Ruth Whitmore knocked on my door one Saturday morning, holding a plate of homemade cookies that smelled like apology. "Garrett, I need to say something I should have said weeks ago. I was wrong about you. I believed Patricia without asking a single question, and I helped spread lies about a man who was only protecting what belonged to him." I invited her in for coffee and listened as she explained how the community was processing what had happened. Many residents felt ashamed of how quickly they had transformed into a mob at Patricia's command. Others were angry at themselves for not demanding evidence before passing judgment. A few still grumbled that I should have just shared the lake to avoid all the conflict. But they were increasingly isolated voices, drowned out by neighbors who now understood what had really been at stake. Ruth shook her head sadly. We let one person convince us that being a good neighbor meant attacking another neighbor. That is not community. That is mob rule with better landscaping. I told her what I had told Marcus. The past was the past. What mattered now was building something better together. The $75,000 judgment arrived via certified check from the HOA's insurance company. I deposited it without celebration because the money had never been the point. It was validation, proof that the system could work when someone refused to be bullied into silence. I used a portion to pay Sarah's legal fees and Tom Richter's surveying costs in full. Another portion went to Linda Foster, who had lost her job at the HOA office immediately after her testimony, but had already found a better position at a law firm that valued integrity over convenience. The partners there had seen her courtroom performance and recognized someone worth hiring. The rest I set aside for improvements to the lake, not because anyone demanded it, but because it was mine to improve as I chose. I ordered a custom fishing dock built from cedar that would last decades. I planted native grasses along the banks to prevent erosion and attract wildlife. And I installed a hand-carved wooden bench facing the water, positioned perfectly to catch the morning sun. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, I walked down to the lake carrying the private property HOA sign that had started everything. It had been removed by a sheepish maintenance crew the day after the verdict, left leaning against my garage like an abandoned prop from a failed stage production. The paint was already peeling. The wood had warped from moisture and neglect. It looked exactly like what it was, a symbol of arrogance that had crumbled under the weight of truth. I stood at the water's edge for a long moment, holding the sign and thinking about the journey that had brought me here, the pre-dawn ambush, the threatening emails, the community meetings where neighbors looked at me like a criminal, and then the methodical process of gathering evidence, building a case, and refusing to surrender, no matter how isolated I felt. I set the sign gently on the surface of the water. It floated for a moment, bobbing on small ripples created by fish rising to feed in the fading light. Then slowly, almost peacefully, it began to sink. Water crept over the painted letters, erasing private property and HOA until nothing remained but a dark shape descending into the depths I had created with $47,500 and 6 months of my life. I watched until it disappeared completely, swallowed by the lake that was mine and would always be mine. The water settled back to stillness, reflecting the sky like a mirror made of liquid gold. I sat down on my new cedar bench and cast a fishing line into the calm water. For the first time in months, my mind was quiet. No legal strategies, no evidence timelines, no anticipating the next attack, just water, wind, and the simple peace of a man who had stood his ground and won. The truth had prevailed, and sometimes that is all the justice anyone needs. If this story resonated with you, please support the Karma Neighbors channel by liking and subscribing. Every like helps more people discover stories about ordinary people standing up against injustice. Share this video with someone who needs to know that bullies do not always win. Comment below with your own HOA nightmare stories. And remember, documentation is power. Truth always finds a way.